Hey everyone, welcome back to Security Unscripted. I'm Vincent Danen, and today we're going to be talking about vulnerability scanners, one of my favorite and not so favorite topics. Some of the problems or challenges, perhaps, that we've seen around vulnerability scanning is they've been around, these vulnerability scanners, for a long time. At the beginning, they served a really useful purpose, right? They allowed you to see what vulnerabilities may impact your estate, like the systems that you're running. But as time moved on and the number of vulnerabilities grew, I'm kind of wondering if the efficacy of these vulnerability scanners is still the same as it was a decade ago. There's some interesting numbers. If we look at it in 2015, there were about 6,500 CVEs assigned for that calendar year. Last year in 2024, we're over 40,000, which is I did the math. It's like over a 500% increase in vulnerabilities from almost 10 years ago, a massive amount. And if we look at it, even the first 3 months of 2025, we're at about 10,000 CVs assigned already, which has already eclipsed what we had in 2015. So the number of vulnerabilities continues to grow. Vulnerability scanners seem to be the tool du jour of how we go and look for these vulnerabilities so we know what to address. And there's some challenges there. So I have today with me fellow coworker Chris Lusk. And Chris, welcome to Security Unscripted. And maybe just introduce yourself real quickly for the audience, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me. Yeah, my name is Christopher Lusk, so I'm a senior product security engineer with Red Hat. I've been with the company about 2.5 years. In my time, I've focused exclusively on vulnerability management and remediation activities, supporting compliance, and also PCERT. And most of my focus is around federal cloud environments, like maintaining our FedRAMP authorization as well. So,
The good stuff. Well, thanks for coming on, Chris. I appreciate it. Start us off with one question, and I'm really looking for your perspective, being that I don't think you noted it, but you deal with a lot of these scanners, or at least scan results in the course of your day-to-day work. So, working primarily in the compliance perspective, and then dealing with vulnerability scanning, what are some of the biggest problems that you're seeing with vulnerability scans, not scanners, but the scans themselves, and how they interpret a system that they're scanning?
yeah, so. I think it's no surprise the biggest issue, from my experience, that we run into are false positives, which impact. That's time that we have to spend validating that something is fixed, doing a deep dive, and if you have an environment that has hundreds of CVEs, you can imagine that adds up pretty quickly. So, in the grand scheme of things, when you're dealing with false positives, that takes time away from you. What limited resources you have, whether it be people or time, away from addressing true vulnerabilities, and then also meeting those SLAs as well. Um,
Yeah, and you mentioned the false positives has always been an issue. So in the context of what you're looking at, so like in the FedRAMP environment, we're basically looking at. I mean, for us, it's Red Hat OpenShift. So like at Kubernetes, lots of containers, lots using effectively the same base image. And if you have a vulnerability in one of those things, I mean, you could see one single CV show up like hundreds, if not thousands, of times. Yeah.
yeah, typically you'll see the same vulnerability impact. We have hundreds of images, so that one CVE can go across upwards of 30, 40, 50 separate images, and each one of those is has to adhere to an SLA, and we have to remediate each one of those. So you can see why exponentially it would just goes up really high with the workload.
Yeah, so we're looking at those false positives. Like I know that say a decade ago or whatever. At least for me, maybe I mean, outside of last week, I haven't really looked at vulnerability scanners that often, other than the scan results when customers maybe complain. But from your perspective, are they getting better around the false positive detection in any way?
I think they're definitely getting better. I think from my experience, the scanning vendors, they have to kind of have an open mind and open perspective. And there have been instances, in our case, our use cases where we provided feedback, and then the scanning vendor went and incorporated those changes in there. But I think the scanners, they're never going to be perfect. There's always going to be issues. So I think it's really important to have a workflow, like a secondary workflow, a way to validate when there is contradictions, and to validate the findings and everything. So I think they have improved, but there's room for improvement as well.
Yeah, so it sounds like kind of what you're describing is like a multi-staged or a multi-partner ecosystem. The way that I kind of look at it is like you have somebody like a vendor, right? A software vendor who is creating, security fixes, responding to security vulnerabilities, presumably maybe creating some security data that others could consume, like their customers, and ideally scanning vendors as well. Then there's the scanning vendor piece as well, where they're creating their code, and every scanning vendor basically does the same thing. They just kind of represent that data in different or unique ways, trying to add their own little spin or value add onto like just a regular vulnerability scan. And then you have the databases where the information comes from if it's not coming from a vendor. Typically, we see most vulnerability scanners using the NVD for their source of data. Sometimes you'll have scanners with their own data feeds as well. So now you have like the scanning vendor provides their point of view, NVD provides their point of view, and then you have a vendor who provides their point of view as well. And then the end user has to reconcile this somehow, right? And so I guess for you, I mean, you're kind of part vendor and also part consumer or user, right? In the work that you're doing. Like how do you sit there and reconcile this? Like how frustrated do you get? Or maybe you're like, no, this is awesome. Like what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think customers, they see vulnerability scanners. The people that we report to, the federal agencies, they see the scanners as the gold standard of truth. So I think we're constantly having to push back on that. And then I think traditionally the burden of proof, when there is an inconsistency or there's a dispute of some kind, it's kind of on the software vendor to prove the case as opposed to why the scanner is showing that. So I think that's something hopefully that will be kind of addressed going forward. I think it's kind of moving in that direction, but I think that's, that burden of proof has always been on a company like us, like Red Hat, to explain like why the scanner is showing this as opposed to why is your scanner interpreting our data as such.
Okay. Sorry, you just poked the bear there. That is probably one of the biggest things, the biggest beefs I have about vulnerability scanners and the customers that use them, right? So it seems to me, based on my experience having done this for a long time and having to field a lot of these escalations and whatnot around vulnerability scanning, and I actually don't understand the thinking. Customer uses scanner X, right? They pay scanner X money. They assume scanner X is going to show them some findings because I guess a scanning vendor that shows no scans, like you might question whether or not this thing even works, right? But conversely, you sit there and you pay company Y a bunch of money for their software. Presumably you trust them because you're deploying their software and you're using it in production and it's, manipulating your data or storing your data and all of these sorts of things. And then you take the position that I trust the scanning vendor more than the vendor of the software that I'm using to trust with my operational day-to-day with zero basis in fact and a lot of evidence to the contrary. I'll relay one quick story, and this was quite a few years ago, so I'm not going to name the vendor. I'm sure they're better by now. But we had a bunch of reports from a customer who was saying like, "Hey, we're scanning a RHEL system, Red Hat Enterprise Linux system, and it's showing these. We're concerned about these all these vulnerabilities in glibc." And it was one particular vulnerability, three particular glibc vulnerabilities. I think they were low or moderate. But because there were 3 glibc derived packages in the container, it counted each primary package as affected by 3 CVEs. So all of a sudden saying like Red Hat Enterprise Linux, this container has 9 CVEs open against it for these really 3 CVEs in glibc, like one source package all came from the same thing. One of them was like a translation file. I'm like, seriously, the vulnerability is not in your translation files. But then they also went and said, like, we don't understand why we're paying you money because Amazon and Oracle have no vulnerabilities. I'm like, man, that's really weird because, I mean, at this time, again, this is like a decade ago, Amazon Linux was based on RHEL. Oracle Linux is based on RHEL. And so I went, okay, I'm going to go look. I looked at those images for those 2 distros. The exact same, like to the release, The exact same packages of glibc were present in both. The thing that I discovered about this scanning vendor is they went and looked for a CVE page entry for each vendor. So for Red Hat, they would go and see, go to our customer portal, see a CVE page. They could see the CVE. They're like, oh, okay, Red Hat's affected by it. They tried to look up the same CVE on Amazon's page and Oracle's page. But because we didn't fix it, they had no fixes to apply. They didn't have a CVE page. They only published a CVE page for something that they fixed. And so the scanning vendor was like, well, those things are returning a 404, so clearly they're not affected by it, which had like Amazon 0, Oracle 0, Red Hat 9. And it's like, what? And
we got punished for the transparency, being punished for being transparent and forthcoming.
I honestly feel like that's the case, right? And I actually had a talk, I think it's on YouTube for Sauce Fusion last year, where I was talking about some of those the disparities between, and I mean, that's in this case, it was proprietary software versus open source software, but clearly there's levels of distinction between open source vendors as well. And Red Hat, for example, is very proud of the fact that we try to make everything as public as possible because knowledge is power, and we want our customers to feel empowered in that way. But scanning vendors don't follow the same rules or the same ethos, I feel like. And it's the customers who get confused by that.
Yeah, I think kind of connecting to what you were saying there, I think something, the scanners, it seems like they do kind of the minimal level of I won't say of effort, but they don't take into effect things where they're saying like the deployment environment, the configurations, how the components used. It seems like a lot of them only go by the versioning information, like numbering specifically. I've seen instances where it'll have the effective version as version A, and we're using version A, but we have a fix included in version A, and it doesn't pick up on that. So I think that's kind of piggybacking that the scanners could do better. The work, they could go a few levels deeper to make sure that it's more thorough and that they're reporting things accurately and being accurate with the customer.
Yeah, and I think there's a burden on a vendor to provide good security data for them to use. But then I also think that once that good security data is available, scanning vendors should prefer using that so that, because I mean, at the end of the day, both the software vendor and the scanning vendor have the same customer. For both of those scenarios, we should be trying to serve that customer as best as possible, knowing that the total cost of ownership when it comes to these scanning products is more than the price, like the sticker price for the license you're paying for the tool, right? Because you've got security teams involved. You may have compliance teams involved. You have the vendor's security teams involved when they have to defend against some erroneous claim that the scanner is making. Perhaps a scanner then gets involved. You mentioned this as well. Like you go back to the scanner and you're like, hey, maybe this isn't correct. So now the scanner's involved and you have all these layers of people across 3 different companies involved trying to reconcile this one thing. And that happens multiple times. Like it's not just one customer, multiple customers, each engaging with their scanning vendor and their software provider, doing this over and over and over again. But one of the things that you mentioned was kind of them better understanding the context of what it is that they're scanning. And it made me think back to the episode that I did a few weeks ago with Subro, talking about the differences between containers and what he called not containers or bare metal or virtual machines. I know, and it should be common knowledge, but it's not that common, that a vulnerability in a container isn't necessarily the exact same or has the exact same presentation as a vulnerability in bare metal or a virtual machine. Now, I don't know, again, I'm not a state-of-the-art of scanning, vulnerability scanning tools or whatnot, but do you see a place where maybe in the future these, or maybe they do it today and I just don't know about it, but these scanning vendors will actually provide a little bit more intelligence around understanding not just what they're scanning, say from what version of an operating system is this or whatnot, or even backported patches versus upstream versions and things like that, but going like, hey, I see this vulnerability. It's in a container. I can see how your container is built. I know which ports are accessible and what language is being used there. And so I can sit there and say, technically this vulnerability is present, but it actually doesn't have any meaningful impact to your environment. Like, do you think that that's something that we're leaning into maybe is in that industry or?
I think it's possible as we continue to adopt AI. And forgive me, I know we had AI ad nauseum, but I think as scanning vendors incorporate AI into their scanning tools, I think there's definitely the opportunity there for the scanner to look at things holistically within the environment and not just the component and the image, and then see how, what configurations are in place, what controls are in place, and then assess, the actual how vulnerable something is, whether it's vulnerable, and so on, and look at it and be more accurate, like what is a true vulnerability as opposed to something that's extremely low risk or may not be, possible at all.
Yeah, I actually think, and don't feel bad about saying AI because that's the world we live in. We talk about it a lot. But I do think that there are huge benefits that AI could bring to a space like this, right? If I look at AI as like, doing some of the preventative stuff, like some of these manual things, and I mean, it's very manual. Again, that total cost of ownership for these things exceeding the license for the scanner itself. If there were some add-ons that the scanning vendors could add that would reduce that noise or eliminate it, provide better context to customers, because when you have fleets of thousands of systems or in some cases millions of containers, right? Like how helpful is a 30,000 row spreadsheet where a handful of vulnerabilities are repeated 10,000 times each, to the end user who actually has to go through and deal with this. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense, and there should be ways to duplicate or deduplicate some of that stuff and actually provide relevant risk to a customer's environment. Because at the end of the day, that's what they want, right? They want to protect themselves against risk. They don't want to just sit there and like go through a list and decide I got to go argue with my vendor because I think that they need to fix this because my scanning vendor, who's infallible, says that it's present, right? And I think I've said a few times before, no one has a business model of applying patches. Like, nobody makes money off of that. Some companies make money producing patches, but nobody just sits there and is like all day, I just want to do a DNF update. Yeah, man, that's what I live for. That's what I get paid for, right? Like, nobody does that.
It's almost like those things are done in an effort not to lose money or to maintain the income.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so costly, right? Like now your overhead on your business or the value that you want to generate for your business shrinks because of all of this nonsensical effort that you have to do for no benefit, right? Like literally zero benefit other than like reducing that list down to something manageable. And there are better ways to do it. Hey, listen, Chris, definitely appreciate you coming on. And I definitely appreciated your perspective. I know that this is a topic I will probably revisit many times in the future, just because it is kind of a hot topic one, but I definitely appreciate your time. And thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks so much. I really enjoyed the chat.
All right. Awesome. And for everyone else, we'll see you next time.